Welcome, dear listeners, to a podcast that's about to transform the way you lead, the way you grow and thrive in your life and career. Get ready to embark on a journey filled with inspiration and self-discovery. This is Afsheen, the host of the Getting Real podcast. And this season, I'm delighted to be joined by none other than my co-host, Vicki Davitashvili. Vicki?
Are you ready to embrace the joy of leadership, the power of self-discovery, and the limitless potential of your career, and ultimately your entire life? Join us on this incredible journey of transformation.
Yep, stay tuned because the best is yet to come. Well, hello and welcome back, listeners. Afsheen here with the Getting Real podcast, and I am joined today yet again with my co-host, co-partner, co-lead, co-conspirator, Vicki Davitashvili. And Vicki and I today are going to be covering the topic of peer accountability. And we will be sharing a few of our anecdotes. We're also going to be sharing what might be hard about peer accountability and what can make it work, and how to get to that point that it's working for you and your team. Now, before we move on to this juicy topic, I'm going to turn it over to Vicki. Vicki, how are you?
I'm doing great. Thank you, Afsheen. And I hope that everyone who's listening today, is feeling wonderful, refreshed, and ready to dig into this very juicy topic, as Afsheen had said.
Yay! I am definitely looking forward to this. You know, Vicki, I am an avid reader, and you know that because I'm always talking about my leadership book club. And one of the books that I have found, one of the leadership and rather team leadership books that I have found that has been profound for me in terms of the impact that I've been able to create through team coaching, utilizing some of the best practices that are in this book is the name of the book is The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team. And it was written by Patrick Lencioni, and it's a little bit of my team Bible almost. It features very strongly in a lot of the work that I do with teams. And I really have found that teams that are able to integrate the characteristics of functional teams, high functioning teams, that Patrick talks about in his book, when teams are able to do that, we see such a significant shift in their productivity and also in their ability to collectively meet goals. And so one of the things that I like to do, or I'm trying to do through this episode, is touch on one of the 5 characteristics of a high functioning team, and that is peer accountability. Now, there are, and I'm just quickly going to go through it, there are actually 5 characteristics of a high functioning team, and those are as follows. So it starts with trust and a baseline of trust. It is then followed by the ability to have difficult conversations and be in healthy conflict. And then that's followed by a deep level of commitment, which is then followed by peer accountability, which is then followed by the achievement of collective results. So that's sort of the 5 characteristics of high functioning teams. They sit on top of each other. So one foundational element needs to happen for the next one to happen, for the next one to happen. And right in the middle of all of that is peer accountability. And so the reason we're talking about this today is because I have found that, and I remember reading in a recent other book that I was telling you about, Vicki, earlier today, was that it is said that teams that lack accountability are teams that are not high functioning, and that teams that are accountable to their individual leader are moderately functioning, but teams in which there is peer accountability, those are actually the highest functioning teams there are. So there is a level of maturity that it takes within a team in order for it to get to that point of peer accountability, and that maturity, it requires a lot of trust, a lot of ability to have difficult conversations, and the willingness to give others permission to hold you accountable. And so we're going to be talking about that today in a little bit more of a deep dive in over the course of our conversation. Whew, I feel like I covered so much there. So I'm going to, before I stop and sort of pass this baton over to Vicki to share her thoughts, I'm going to share some facts. Research suggests people are 65% more likely to meet their goals if they simply commit to another person, right? And it also suggests that rate skyrockets to 95% if there are regular meetings and touch points on progress in between. So imagine if we became open and willing and trusting enough to not just be held accountable by whoever our manager or leader is, but to share and open up the space for us to hold each other accountable as peers, how much our ability to drive business results would be amplified. So that's the reason we're having this conversation, is to achieve a talk about ways in which we can amplify business results through peer accountability. And now I'm going to take a deep breath and I'm going to look over at Vicki and say, Vicki, what comes up for you now that I've shared all this context?
Well, I love all the context, and I think it was really important for you to lay the framework and the foundation behind the conversation, right? It's interesting, as you talk about accountability, I start thinking about consumer experiences and just experiences as humans, right? And there are so many programs where, whether it's weight loss or, running apps, and what they'll do is they will literally have peer-to-peer sharing of like, how are you doing, right? Because you get that accountability partner, and that accountability buddy, that's the system, that this is built on, so that people can help reach their goals. Now, this is in our lives as people, as just consumers, but at work, it's interesting, the more you spoke, the more what was coming up for me is I've certainly been in cultures where we have been super hierarchical, and the accountability was definitely to the manager. And what happens there is you get very siloed thinking, right? And you get only one point of view in which you can create results, or in which you can be creative, or in which you can, deliver business outcomes. The organization that I'm in right now, we pride ourselves on being extremely flat. And I never feel like I am accountable to my boss. In fact, I always feel like I'm accountable to my peers. And especially being the role that I'm in, so I lead the digital team, and digital, I always say I'm a horizontal, right? I work with all the business groups. I work with all the groups within the organization. And so my accountability is so much more to my peers than it is to anybody else, right? Because we have to partner together. I'm an enabler. I'm an enabler to, give them the ability to deliver on their outcomes. And I can tell you a couple of things, right? One is trust and psychological safety is absolutely at the heart of our ability to function and function well. The positive of this is that there's a ton of creativity. There's a lot of groupthink. But I do want to shine a light on a little bit of the negative, right? I feel like sometimes when we have, and maybe it's not just, I think it's just a byproduct of a team that is super accountable to one another, is that we just tend to hold hands and sing kumbaya for way too long, right? And instead of, I think that as a result of so much collaboration and cooperation, you do get stuck a little bit and start swirling instead of propelling forward. And so I think that you need to be able to create the right balance on the team between the accountability, the psychological safety, the cooperation, the collaboration, the bringing forward of all of the creative ideas. I just heard a really interesting talk by Jeff Bezos, and do you know what he said? When he would come into a meeting, he would always speak last. And in fact, he would make the junior person go first. And the reason that he would do that is because he didn't want to influence anybody else's ideas or thoughts. And he wanted to give the opportunity for the junior person to speak up, because the longer they sit in the room, the less likely they are to speak up. And so I think that when you have that level of cooperation and peer accountability, you get the creative thinking from every level within the organization. But again, I think, the downside of that much collaboration is like, you don't move as fast as maybe when there is a little bit more of the hierarchy, and it's kind of like, all right, well, I'm the decision maker, and let's just kind of move forward, right? So I'll pause there. Those are my reflections.
Ooh, I really love what you share there about, the potential for, I love how you said, to just sing Kumbaya and not maybe make fast enough progress towards what we are accountable for delivering. And at the same time, the other side of it being that creativity sits within these kinds of conversations and relationships as well. And I can't disagree with you. I think that is a really interesting perspective that you've added. And I guess what it got me thinking about was, so what does it take to do it well? And you mentioned something around trust. Yeah. And so I kept thinking, what does it take to do it well? What does it take to do it well? So it doesn't become, it doesn't get in the way, but it also isn't so difficult that we don't know how to do it well. And what does it take to do peer accountability well with the intention of getting to the business results in an efficient and effective way? And some early thoughts from me, and then I'd love to hear some of your thoughts as well. So one of the things that I'm discovering it takes to do peer accountability well is, as you mentioned, a very strong foundation of trust. So to have a good look at, are you ready to take feedback or take inputs or take questions from others around you than just the person in your hierarchy? And if you're not, what do you need in order to feel as though you're willing to have that exchange? And what permissions need to be given and taken in order for this to work effectively? Often, it is such a wonderful idea for leaders who become familiar with this concept, especially if it's the first time they're hearing about it. Because they're like, oh wow, that means I can just let my team members take care of each other and I can take my hands off because there's so much else I need to do. But it's really important for leaders to realize that if they're going to take their hands off, there is going to be a moment when everybody's going to be wondering, do I trust this person enough? Do I trust my team members enough to have this conversation with them? Do I get the same kind of input that I want? The same kind of direction that I need? Am I doing too much kumbaya here? And all of these questions really do come up when the concept of peer accountability is first introduced in teams. And I have worked with teams that have wrestled with this probably the most versus everything else in Lencioni's 5 dysfunctions of a team, right? In the 5 characteristics. Because there are so many things to contend with. Do I trust? Do I want? Is it too slow? Is it not fast enough? Do I care what the supply chain person thinks when I'm in marketing? So there's so much that needs to happen before a leader literally lets go of the reins and says, and now you guys are ready to be fully peer accountable to each other. I'm going to stop here. I see you nodding. So
I'm nodding, but you just said, before I fully give you the accountability to each other. Mm-hmm. I don't think you fully ever do as a leader. I gotta be honest with you. I think that you as a leader definitely set the tone for what the culture on the team is. And to me, peer accountability is almost like part of the culture, right? Just like psychological safety. What comes up for me is, as a leader, you can set the tone of trust, of psychological safety, of empowerment, right? I think empowerment is super important on a team. And as a leader, you are in a position who can set that tone. And I do think that with those ingredients, you create the peer accountability to each other more so than to you as a leader. However, I don't think as a leader, you really ever walk away fully and completely turn over that peer accountability. I think it might be a 90-10, meaning 90% it's peer-to-peer accountability. But at some point, you need to hear okay, how are things going? What progress are we making? How are we doing against the funding? And you're not there because they're giving you a status update, but you're there again as a servant leader, as in hearing the progress, but also saying, okay, so how can I help you? Yeah. And how can I help you could be give you a lens, give you a perspective, maybe remove roadblocks, help you get incremental funding, help you think about, something in a different way. Again, it's servant leadership. It's not like I am here and I'm the master and I'm going to tell you what to do. It's not hierarchical. It's let's resolve this together. But I think that in order to help propel things forward, right, you still, I am still fully involved and engaged, but I'm always engaged from the lens of, okay, so what's happening and how can I help you? Is there anything I can do for you? Right? And that's how you move forward together. So I paused there, bless you. So when you said fully, I was like, oh, I don't think it ever fully happens, at least not for me. I'm still 10% in there, if not more.
Oh my gosh, I love this. I thank you for, really calling that out. And I tell you why. Because what you are talking about is by doing the 10% of it rather than the 100% of it. Imagine, and I think you painted the picture, what you are doing instead as a leader in the 90% of the space that you've created for yourself, right? And that's what I love about what you just shared. It was, you're right, you are giving away enough so that you have space to play a different, more enabling, more empowering role to those who deserve to have that and deserve the trust to have that. And at the same time, the role that you play as a leader becomes different as well, right? You become the one who is there to get, as you said, the roadblocks out of the way if needed, and to me, what that added or really sort of lit up inside me was this. What is the gift in that? What is the gift when you give away 90% and you hold the space? And with that 90%, what you do is you hold the space of trust. You hold the space of creating a team culture of trust. You hold the space of empowerment. What is the gift in that you are actually creating as a result of choosing to be that leader? And just really curious what comes up for you, because what comes up for me, just sharing very quickly, is the opportunity for the leaders who come up after me to have better decision-making skills, better ability to be self-empowered, to tackle problems as they continue to grow in their career steps. So stopping here, what are your thoughts?
Oh, that's interesting. What came up for me when you said that was when I give away that 90% and I create the spaciousness for both me and for my team members and peers, is I think the biggest gift is that they come up with brilliant ideas. They come up with ideas that are 1,000 times better than my ideas, right? Because I am just one lens versus 10 or 12 different lenses that, I always talk about this formula of 1 + 1 being equal to 11. And I always feel like my team members always have much better answers or much more creative solutions than I ever could, right? If I were just going it alone. And so what I think it creates is a culture that really achieves excellence, but without forcing the excellence, right? Because it just becomes a natural byproduct of the way that we operate and function. And so whenever my direct reports will come to me and they're like, Vicki, blah, 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 right? I'm like, okay, I sit and I listen, I hear them, and then I always ask them my favorite question, which is, all right, so if we had a magic wand, how would this work? How would this work? I don't know the answer to it, right? But in an ideal world, how would this work? And they literally start to solution because they're so close, right? And they understand the details and the impacts and the implications of how things work, details that I would never know, right? And so they start to creatively come up with, well, I would change this and then I would change that. Awesome. Let's look at it that way, right? And so that's what comes up for me is I just think that we come up with much better solutions, products, ideas than I would have had I been more of a hierarchical type of a leader.
I love your examples so much. One of the things that Lencioni does in a more structured, less intuitive way also attempts to achieve what you are able to achieve in your sort of natural personal leadership style. So one of the suggestions is always, as a leader, when you sit on let's say an exec meeting that you're chairing and your team is there, one of the roles in that 90% that the leader has is to continue to ask and ensure that at least 3 people have an input into whatever problem is trying to be solutioned in that moment. And so what you're speaking to is exactly that, I feel. It's exactly what I'm hearing is when I step into my 90%, I'm able to hold a space for that more effectively, and that lends to better, more well thought out solutions for us to achieve our goals and our objectives in our team, but also for our organization. And that's awesome. I love that example.
Honestly, I've observed that whenever I create that space for my team members, they always come up with much better ideas. So, the biggest shifts that I think I've gone through as a leader is going from like a helicopter parent to an empowering and enabling parent, right? Where it's not just me helicoptering in and solving and just, and giving them the answer. What I've learned is that better answers lie within my team members. So right? And that's why I always try to ask them the really open-ended questions like, oh, so tell me more. How would that work? Well, what do you think? Well, right? And I don't even go at it from the lens of why. I go at it from the lens of the what and the tell me more and the how, right? And those I find to be the questions that are more probing and open-ended, where they feel open to start to really come up with their own ideas and thoughts. And so I love that process of co-creation with my team members.
Oh, thank you. I love the ideas and the suggestions you've given, because I think this has just been such a wonderful way to encapsulate the what's in it for the business and also for the team to take this leap of faith into peer accountability. And I'd love to ask you, and also sort of ask myself the same question, is since there are so many positive reasons for doing this, for the leader, for the team, for the business outcomes, completely based on just what we've quickly discussed over here. What is getting in the way? I wonder what does get in the way. And I have a few examples that I could share, but I'd love to hear from you first this time. Is what gets in the way of not doing that when it's such a positive and productive approach to leadership and to working with your peers and achieving your business objectives?
So I'm going to give you a slightly personal development / spiritual answer to this.
Yes.
I think what gets in the way is fear. And when I say fear, it's really the fear of relinquishing control, right? And I think that leaders who operate in an energy of fear and control is fear, right? Like, we control things because we're afraid that if we were to surrender it or turn it over, that things will not work out the way that we envision them to work out. And it's like, heaven forbid if it's not done my way. And so I think that a lot of times, leaders are afraid to relinquish that kind of control to their team members because they don't have the trust in their teams to do it even better than they would, number one. Or they're afraid that the team will expose that the leader is a fraud because they somehow came up with a better solution than the leader did, right? And I think that leaders who operate in that energy of fear, A, they drive much poorer business outcomes, but two, I think that they really stunt the creativity and the growth of both their team, but also themselves. They hold themselves back and they don't realize it, right? Because the moment that you start to open up to that creative space with your team, your team starts to thrive and flourish. And I'm not being boastful when I say it, but like, there's a reason why my team is both delivering results, but then also has some of the highest employee engagement scores in the organization. And it's because we're thriving together. And it's not because like I don't hover. In fact, I probably don't know enough of the details, right? But I don't need to, because I trust my team, and that's not where I add the value. And so I think that as a leader, you have to have enough self-confidence to know that 1 + 1, you plus your team, is going to create gold, and it's going to create magic, rather than you forcing your opinions and perspectives, or you trying to take the limelight in the organization. So that's my personal perspective.
What a wonderful share. Thank you so much. And when we work with the Lencioni process and we get to this point, we see it as two key enablers. It's the leader and how the leader needs to be, and then it's the team and how they need to be with each other. So since you've talked so beautifully about the leader and how the leader needs to be, I'm going to touch on what might get in the way of the team of being very effective in this space. And some of the things that I've been noticing is one, of course, you need to have high levels of trust. So you'll always be working, that's something that you have to keep working on in an active way, actively. And trust is built not through big gestures. Brené Brown shares a lot about this in her book Dare to Lead, which we recently read, but in the small gestures on an ongoing basis. So trust is built over a period of time and in ongoing ways. So until you have let's say, added to the jar of pearls little bits of trust throughout a period of time, you are going to find that people are going to get more and more willing to take your feedback and be held accountable by you as a peer yourself. So trust is a really big enabler. And I think, in a way, all of us know that, right? Trust, psychological safety, big enabler. But what comes next, and I think this is the one I find most interesting to address. It is the ability to have difficult conversations. And it's the ability to challenge each other and the ability to hold each other accountable in a way that's respectful, yet at the same time accountable, right? And I think that as individuals, as peers in a leadership team, I work with a lot of teams who are super nice to each other. They're super appreciative of each other's skills. They have a high level of trust in each other's capabilities, but they have the hardest time sort of crossing over into each other's territories, right? And having challenging discussions with each other about how maybe what they're doing might actually not be having an effective outcome on what is happening in my function or in another person's function. And so that willingness to spar in a healthy way, and in a way that is not just at face value, but truly in a way that shows I respect your opinion, I trust you, I value your inputs, and I will incorporate those into my thinking, and I will genuinely allow your influence and your care to be within the way that I go forward. That is such an important step that teams need to make in order for them to get to that next level of higher levels of accountability to each other. And as I said earlier, I work with a lot of wonderful people in some wonderful organizations who are very kind and supportive of each other. And while that is great because it's a comfortable place to work in, sometimes we have to look at it and say, are we going to take the privilege of our comfort and use that as a way to hide from some of the more challenging conversations that we could have together, not to get personal with each other, but so that we can all collectively deliver our shared purpose, our shared objectives, and our shared organization in mind of the greater good. So I'm going to stop here. I know that was a long one, but I really felt like that had to be said. What do you think?
No, I think you're absolutely spot on. And I think this goes back to what I said at the very beginning, right? Like we work in such friendly, collaborative environments that, that because we're holding hands together for so long, that you get stuck and you don't make progress as much. And maybe you're shining a light on the reason that we don't make progress as quickly as we could. I think that could be one of the underlying reasons, right, behind it, is because we don't have the tougher conversations. I can tell you, though, a couple of things that came up for me is, one, I like to open up my discussions, and whenever I know I need to go into the tougher conversations, number one, you as a leader have to have the courage to have the conversation and to open it up. And you have to be comfortable with being uncomfortable. And that's okay. That's why you're a leader, right? Discomfort is how we grow. That's number one. Number two, you never ever need to be mean or rude when you have a tough conversation. Having a difficult conversation is not synonymous with being bad or mean or rude or any of the above. It's just very candidly and openly and honestly sharing what you think and how you feel. Now, you can never control the other side of the equation, so you cannot control how the other person perceives what you say to them. However, you can control how you open up the conversation and the lens with which, or the energy with which you go into the conversation. So whenever I go into difficult discussions, I love to open it up with, in the spirit of openness, may I just share some observations with you? And I always try to go in with like the positive of like, hey, I'm so grateful for A, B, C, D, whatever that is. You know what that is, right? Start with the things that are working well. And then just say, you know, this is an opinion of one. And I always say that. I'm like, listen, this is an opinion of one. But from my lens and my perspective, A, B, C, and D, might we consider doing it differently? Here are some thoughts and suggestions. And I find that this is not a confrontational conversation. Sometimes I am met with resistance on the other side, and I understand it, right? And when I'm met with resistance, I don't take it personally. I just get curious. And that's when those questions of curiosity come back. Oh, so tell me more about that. Oh, so maybe I didn't understand that. What do you mean by that? How would that work? How might that work? And I think that as long as you stay in an energy of curiosity and openness, and again, you don't come in with an energy of confrontation, but more an energy of like, I'm sharing opinion of one, I'm coming to you in the spirit of openness, and how might we solve for this together? You know, I think you diffuse a lot of the fear and discomfort that comes with having these types of conversations. So it's all in the how you do it, and less so in the what you're doing, I guess, is my thought.
And I love that. You're so right. You know, what is the spirit with which you are approaching these conversations? And if you both feel, or if you all feel, let's say you're at a boardroom, even if you're in a one-on-one, if each individual at the table has a deep sense and level of accountability, and you all know it, and you deeply trust each other, then it paves the way for having a conversation where you're both stuck in for the right reasons, you know, and being able to convey that is such an important skill set to master. As I've matured in my own leadership journey, I have practiced my ability to have courageous conversations, as Brené Brown calls it, my ability to have courageous conversations from a place of grace and respect. And if you are able to have courageous conversations while at the same time being respectful and having grace, and I love your ad, and being curious, the outcomes of those conversations can be really helpful in peer accountability, right? And so if there was one thing I would love for leaders to practice, it's the practice of having courageous conversations. A courageous conversation doesn't have to be one in which everybody's fighting. It's just speaking the truth and being respectful and understanding the other person's point of view. Here's what my last thought. If you meet, or when you meet, somebody who is able to do that, who is able to have courageous conversations, who is able to challenge the status quo and at the same time be respectful and curious, what do you think of them, Vicki?
I think they're a superstar and we need more of that. Yeah, absolutely.
For me, it's always been, I admire people like that very much. Yeah. And I would like to think that others see me as that as well. If there's anything I would wish for people to see in my leadership, it is that I have the ability to have difficult conversations and do it with grace and empathy. Because I think, I really think that takes a level of a commitment, a personal commitment to show up every day to do that for the greater good. And I would see somebody who does that as well as somebody who's dearly committed to doing the right thing in the right way. Yay.
I'm in full agreement. There's nothing more to add. So what a wonderful conversation. I'm so glad that you brought this forth, and I think that there are intricate nuances that I think we don't realize, but a lot of really interesting points have come through, at least for me, that I'm going to now start to take away in my daily life as a leader. So thank you. And in observing how my teams interact. So this was very insightful. I'm so glad that you brought that forward.
For me too, I always love observing how you intuitively lead, and I love that you're so authentic and transparent with sharing your experiences in the field of life. So thank you for reflecting on a topic that can sometimes be really hard to grasp, and making it real for us through your experiences, and yeah, it means a lot. Thanks, Vicki, so much.
Oh, my pleasure.
Stay tuned, because the best is yet to come.